Good
Hi,
to
good
see
to see
you.
you.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
Hell.
so we're going to have two parts today. We're going to start with the Book of Tea and continue that discourse. It's kind of split between two topics there. One is just our own experiments with ceremony and ritual, not just with tea, but other parts of our life, and how that affects our experience of the world and of ourselves. And then the second one is how did Heidegger um, borrow or steal concepts from the Book of Tea and elsewhere to make the notion of Dasein?
Mhm.
That's a charge that's out there. And then the second half of the hour, I'd like to get into my work with Bakhtin and polyphony and applying it to the coalition of Mockley workers, but mostly to this guy Nelson Peltz and his family that seemed to be pretty rude to the help. And I think
Very rude, very.
a connection there to Bakhtin's reading of Dostoevsky's the Notes from the Underground. So I do an analysis of Executive Nelson Peltz and Notes from the Underground, because I think he's the underground man. So that's what we'll get to in the last part of it. And allegedly, I always use the word allegedly.
I just want to say hello to Wanda. Wanda, I haven't seen you
Wanda.
for a decade or more.
Right.
And it
How
is
are you,
so
Jerry?
good.
Oh my
It is
goodness.
so good to see you.
You as well.
Very
Okay, I'm going to mute.
Okay.
So, Eduardo, why don't you kick us off with some of your statements about the Book of Tea? You don't have to get too crazy, and then we'll go to Sabina.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to mention that when I was starting my tenure track position, I went for 4 weeks to the East West Center, University of Hawaii, and the East West Center was supposed to be this type of program that built on their effort to try to be built in the university, one of the Florida, the North South Center. But what I was going to mention is that they had a chance any type of building. They had the budget to build any type of building there, and uh, uh, in a little space that they have. And what they chose to build was a testimony room at, at the University of Hawaii. And that's what they thought was one of the most representative buildings and artifacts that they could have representing somehow that culture. What I also wanted to mention is that, well, throughout the book, um, there's a lot of mention both to Taoist and to Zen Buddhist, but probably the philosopher or the Taoist master that is never mentioned, but most historians consider the main influence on Kakuzo as Zhang Zui. And Zhang Zui has a wonderful collection of discourses or speeches, and they are divided into the inner, the outer, and the miscellaneous. And it's a wonderful collection. And a lot of the topics that he discusses, Shang Shui, are the same that Kakuso discusses here. That type of the the simplicity and the imperfect and the impermanent, etc. But one of the things that he has that Zhang Zhui adds is that everything is meaningless. All that is meaningless if virtue is not practiced. And I thought about it, and maybe it is implicit in Kakuzo, but he never makes that explicit. And Zhang Zhui, who many consider to be the main influence on Kakuzo, points that out in Zhang Zhui. Yeah, that's one of those things. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, I think I'm fortunate to know, and I thought about David being a righteous brother, you know, a practitioner of virtues in many ways. So one thing that I wanted to mention, I'm gonna sidetrack a little bit, is that I've been cheating by reading a book, the book that in English will be published in April, next April, by Byung-Chul Han, and it will be called The Crisis of Narrative. And he has a chapter on storytelling. He's he has very clever remarks, but you can tell that he's not really familiar a lot of the ongoing debates, both in narrative as well as in storytelling. But it's really interesting so there's that chapter, and then there's chapter 5. It's called The Disenchantment of the World, and it reminded me that when David wrote, do you remember what was the title of your article, David, on the Journal of Spirituality and Management about maybe 12 years ago?
Oh, was that the history of my grandmother, Wilda?
Yes, yeah. And I remember that you asked me and you asked a few other people to write some short articles as commentary. And I remember that my contribution was titled The Reenchantment of David Bogie. And now there's the chapter of the upcoming book by Byung-Chul Han that will be called The Disenchantment of the World. So I just thought that it was ironic.
Well, thank you for that. I'll give that some thought. Yeah.
Is Jean Sui a French person?
No. He was Chinese.
Chinese.
From let me see. I think it was about around the 4th century.
Okay.
What would I see? Yeah, I'll let me look the spelling, the transcription of the spelling and simplified Chinese, and then write it here in the chat for this session.
Okay. I will be right back. I need to go get my lunch. I'll be right back.
This is that special issue. And Eduardo Barrero, The Reenchantment of David Bogie, and other kind of commentaries. The cover is terrible. The spiky chair. Hugo Letitia's son decided to be an artist. Yeah. Well, Sabina's going, no, I don't want to sit there. But anyway, inside the issue is pretty nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And then I don't know if 2 steps ahead of Byung-Chul Han or if he's ahead now in that dialect, disenchantment and reenchantment.
You know, the thing I notice about the scholars in storytelling and narrative, is, with some exceptions, just about every one of them has their own theory.
Yeah.
And some might lean more towards Burke or Aristotle or Bakhtin or, our actor network theory guy. So they're kind of all over the map. You kind of just put a stake in the ground and move. That's my observation.
Yeah, but I don't think that it has been used before when it comes to either narrative or storytelling. But then he has Byung-Chul Han has that chapter on disenchantment, and yeah, and Byung-Chul Han is not a narratologist by any means. He just writes best in philosophy the whole time. So it's like pretty much like Gigé, a little bit lighter than Gigé, but writing about everything. A philosopher writing about everything. Yeah.
Well, very cool. So what Sabina, what are some of your notes?
Well,
Or
actually,
got inspired?
I'm just going to go to the things that really, really struck me or puzzled
Okay.
me. Let me
Pick a
begin
couple.
with the puzzlement, and then we can perhaps discuss it and clarify that. My puzzlement was, okay, I underlined this. One of the things I do understand is that it is the process, and I quote here, the process and not the deed, which was interesting. So, meaning, it's not the result, right, that counts, but the journey towards it. It's not the destination, but walking along towards it, whereas I think, we often are so focused in our Western thinking on, well, the result is that, did we make the sales goals for this quarter? Did we, all of these things, that did I cook that soup perfectly? I mean, we're focused so on the result that we forget really about the past. And I think that is true, that we don't really pay attention to that. We pay attention to is this, and we judge the result, right? We have this criteria of judging the result, a measurement of whatever it is. How many points did I get on the test? Did the guests like the soup? Did, all of that. And we kind of are on, the way I'm reading it, that we are on automatic pilot when we go through the process, whereas, it's here in, what the point here is, that it is the process that is actually more important. And I love this particular passage here where it says, it was the completing, not the completion, which was really vital. And I underline that because I do think that that is really, is really cool. A new meaning grew into the art of life. And here is the puzzlement that comes in for me because, okay, I understand about the process being more important than the result. Okay, so far so good. But then tea began to be not a poetical pastime, but one of the methods of self-realization. And that is where I was stumbling a bit. And I thought to myself, okay, that connection between, is it that connection that if we pay more attention to the processes in our life, that is self-realization, and that tea is sort of the peg that this is hanging on, so to speak. So I've stumbled over that, the connection between tea and self-realization. And maybe if I can get, maybe if we can talk about that, because that I was a little confused. The other thing that stood out for me is the relative, that, that it is the change and the relativity between things. And that's what I think Eduardo mentioned so beautifully last time about the Japanese gardens, that I love that, Eduardo, how you explained it's about the relationships between the elements. And I really love that. And being an artistic person, I can really see the point because, when you're drawing or painting, you can never do that in isolation. The elements, I put one thing down and it changes the rest of it. And you always relate everything when you're drawing or painting, you always relate everything to everything else as you're going along. You cannot not do that, because then you have a really crappy, pardon my French, a crappy piece of art if you don't do that. You can't just plop something here and not relate it to something else, because in art, when you're working, on a canvas or a piece of paper, whenever I put something down, it already guides me to the next thing. I cannot not relate it, so these elements in essence are sort of talking to each other when you're working, and I let them talk. They send a signal, and I was like, okay, if I do this, if I put this color down here, well, that already puts it in a direction of what the color next to it, is or is not going to be in a vague kind of way. And then it gets more specific as you work. So it's all about relativity, which I really like. And I like the idea of the flux that they talk about, that, the limitations of words freeze something in place. Once you define something, right, that's in the text here, it freezes it. And it puts boundaries, right, that are set, and you can't, and it stunts, any sort of growth, which I like that concept too. Language as a freezing. And then the idea of adjustment, and I thought, oh my God, it seems here the connection to Heidegger when he says relativity seeks adjustment, and I think, oh my God, if that isn't Heidegger's attunement, oops. Okay, here we have it. So I'm a little discombobulated by the fact, oh my God, he stole so much. I thought there he was so creative, and now I'm like, man, he's a thief. Good grief. So, but I like the idea of, the relativity, and also with laws, right? That it's not fixed, right? If you are, what I was thinking is, if somebody who is hungry steals a loaf of bread, right? That's a completely different thing, right? So I can see the relativity in these things. It's like when you have laws that you consider the entire circumstances of, of the person's life. So I mean, I really see it. And the other thing I really loved and struck me that was about the vacuum. And that probably was my favorite part. The vacuum, right? But I think the vacuum too is possibility, right? I mean, I love the passage where he talks about that in Western thought we see the walls, but the walls are not important. It's what's between the walls. It's that vacuum, right? Which can, or the vessel which can be filled. But then I think it's possibility, right? I mean, if we take time, right? Time is possibility. If we have our lives, right? And you look, at your calendar and you see, oh, I've got 2 hours here. It's a time vacuum. I was like, oh, I can, oh my gosh, what can I do with this? And then you go, oh, I could do this, I could do that, but so I think time and space as possibilities, that vacuum as possibility. And I think there's an aliveness in, possibility. So that's what struck me in all of this, relativity, the vacuum. Those are the things that really struck me. And my struggle is with, self-realization. If somebody could maybe help me, how T connects to self-realization. I am a little bit puzzled, how, I guess the steps maybe, how do we get from T to self-realization? Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you.
I would just observe, it seems like you're already there. Because your examples of your art are being in the midst of the process and letting each surprise in the process or each happening set the direction for the next relationship, or seeing the whole panoply of relationships. So it seems like you're a very non-Western artist,
I agree with David when you ask the question about our measuring our accomplishments and all of this. The next part seemed to answer your question. You learn how to be in the moment when you get into your art, and the flow that you talked about happens.
Yeah.
In other words, I agree with David. You're already there.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I mean, it is actually, and the irony is, when you're in that flow, what happens is that measured time actually absolutely disappears, because these relationships take over on a good day. These relationships, you get into that flow so much. And sometimes, when I am really in that flow, I wish it happened more often. But when you're in that flow, time, it's irrelevant. It's entirely irrelevant, and you look at the clock and it's like, oh, that was just 5 hours. But I mean, you're so in that, you're like in the middle of it, and measured time doesn't matter. It doesn't count, and then when people ask you, well, how long did it take you to do that? I don't know, and I don't care. I mean, it's a complete, I mean, now if I did this, commercially, where I said, well, I have to work on so many items because at the end of the month, I have to have sold or whatever, so many, which currently I'm not doing. But, but then it becomes about a completely different thing. Then it becomes mass production. It becomes something where I'm not really in it.
Yes.
You're not fully there. It becomes about, again, the result, it's like, and it's then it becomes like mechanistic. It's like, cranking out another, wine cork or something, like a machine.
Yeah. Or heuristic, considering the space that I work in. Everything in the online spaces can. So the question is, how do you apply these philosophical concepts to a compressed 5-week class online with 68 students?
You don't.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
And you're already, right? I mean, you already have the parameters set, right? You have so much time, so many students.
Right.
These are the results that are expected, right? I mean, it is already preset.
Right.
Mhm.
But we have industry managers that are still operating contrary to
Yes.
Western methods.
Yeah.
So they become increasingly frustrated
Mhm.
in a project management time and schedule space. So here you are, what you said, Sabine, about relativity seeks adjustment. Where is the space for adjustment? And who
Yeah.
determines what that adjustment is? Typically, the professor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just reflecting here that in the Book of Tea, it's taking the time in the process, or as Sabine is saying, it's not about the time, but jumping into the moment. And for me, being a professor at New Mexico State was to break out of the routine. Anytime I could break the routine, just break the set, I would try to do it. It was playing musical chairs or having them run up and down the stage or just calling randomly on people, just because people are in these university settings are just, like you said, the curriculum is set, the expectations are set, the students want certification, some want to learn, but if I don't break it up, um, take them outside, do some drumming out under a tree. You know what I mean? Like I would ask them, like, what's the most spiritual place on campus? Go there. And they were like, how do we even do that? You know what I mean? But and I'm not saying I'm successful because you've been in my classes and you know that it can be pretty dull, but there's times to just break out. And I think the Book of Tea, the point is that most of life is chaotic and bizarre and mechanistic and these other kinds of things, and it's up to us to disengage that, to find moments of peace and harmony. And like I went outside, I was looking at all these outdoor camping things in the Northwest where Ronnie lives, and I was thinking about, wow, that's really great to have all these trees and things. And I said, wait, I could go out in my backyard and start a fire now. I could take my tea in the backyard, put my feet up, and have an hour before Enthinkment where I'm in that zone. You know what I mean? Rather than the fret zone. Anyway, I'll shut up. But that's sort of, I'm trying to tie in Wanda's comment to the Book of Tea.
Yeah, David, I'm inspired by the fact that you break up the rhythm, but you do more than that. You keep the routine from settling in. So to Wanda, I would suggest that this worked for me from time to time. When you have a thick program to fit into a small space and too many students to really communicate meaningfully with them, uh, what you can have them do on their own can at least ease the burden of what you can do with them, and don't try to do too much. I would tell the students every week that I counted on them and their brilliance on internet to move forward on certain areas. But what I did in class was not too much for the number that they were. But after they started giving me 60 to 90, I found my limits. So anyway, I think David's right that this not getting into a routine has a lot to do with breaking the spell of all these programs that are crammed into too short a time.
And
I know Wanda is a wonderful teacher too, because I have a lot of experience with Wanda in her teaching. But um, there seems to be, like, in the process of a semester, an early part where people are kind of excited, and then the next quarter where people don't really trust you or the process you're in, and then as they build trust, they're more willing to risk, and you're more willing to stretch them a bit. You know what I'm saying? But so it's not like a monolithic, constant note rhythm. It's got there's opportunity places to build trust and to do risk, if that makes any sense. And then there's times where you just got to sort of knuckle down and go through it until the trust building is there. I don't know, something like that. It is a very strange thing. I'm glad I can just sit by the fire now.
But David, I really like that, your comment. And I remember being in some of your classes, and it was just, amazing. And but I think there is an aliveness to novelty, right? I mean, when you break that, all of a sudden you have people's attention, right? I mean, the unexpected, it comes in there, and you're like, wait, you wake up in a way. I think it's a waking up to that then makes us ready to, okay, after that little break into something that's unexpected and novel, I think I felt myself to be more ready. Okay, let's go back to the routine, but I think that breaking up is, energizing as well. It's like this humdrum, thing, if like water dripping, it's like, okay, got it. It's like drip, 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 drip. But then all of a sudden, you break that with something unexpected, and you're like, wow. I mean, I feel there's an energy, a positive energy in that.
It's very much about embodiment, and I think that's true in the Book of Tea too. Is the embodied practices. There is not the intellectualizing, although this author does a lot of intellectualizing, but not too bad. But it's finding ways to get the people that, and I don't know how you do this online. The way we're doing online, I guess, where you put your hands out, you're trying to send hearts and love and energy and that sort of thing. But in the classroom, to get people moving out of the chairs and get people rearranging in groups. You can do that online too, and I'm sure you do it, Wanda, with breakout groups and other kinds of, just breaking it up,
Speaking of breaking the monotony, I started using the breakout group function, and there was a student that wasn't going into her group, and I'm sitting here, what is going on here? Come to find out, she was umpiring a game.
Oh.
And I was like,
all kinds of things.
and then I was like, okay, do you think that's safe while you're listening to the lecture? I would rather you just listen to the recording and go ahead and umpire your game. And she said, I can't believe you're giving me permission to do that. I said, of course, because I feel that's what you needed to do during the class. And just go back and look at the recording. Please be safe. Yeah,
I agree. You can get hit with a ball.
Yes.
And not paying attention.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you a paragraph, if I might, since I ordered this book and I spent like $25 for it in the mail. It actually is good. It's hardback, and the other comparable books were 4 times that price. But anyway, there's only one little paragraph about Heidegger, and it's on page 123. And what he says is that this fellow he mentions was one of the teachers at the university, studied in Germany in 1918, immediately after First World War, and hired Heidegger as a private tutor. And before moving back to Japan at the end of his studies, this professor, Ito, handed Heidegger the copy of Das Buch vom Tee, which is the German translation Okakaro Kakuzo, sorry for the pronunciation, the Book of Tea, is a token of his appreciation. That was in 1919. Sein and Zeit, in other words, Being in Time, was published in 1927 and made Heidegger famous. Mr. Ito was surprised and indignant that Heidegger used Zarathustra's concept without giving him credit. Years later, in 1945, Professor Ito reminisced with me and speaking to his in his Shoshone dialect. Heidegger did a lot for me, but I should have laid into him for stealing. And that's sort of what, you can read the whole book, but that's about it, you know? So it's an accusation, it's an allegation. It sort of leaves us to figure out which passages were stolen. But there is a concept in the Book of Tea, and I don't have it with me now, but it starts with a C. So there's some Japanese word that supposedly is the key to understanding this this accusation. It was Heidegger stealing concepts from Asia and Japan and Book of Tea, and then recasting them in the Greek anthem, you know, the Greek canon. It breaks my heart if that's true, because here Sabine has worked for 6 years or 8 years translating Heidegger back and forth. And if the guy's a thief, why should we bother, I guess? You know.
I feel that, it just, I mean, I'm just, actually, I really am so disappointed. I mean, I already knew that he was a despicable human being, I mean, that isn't surprising. And it just adds to it, though, but my thinking was, okay, he's a despicable human being, but creative. And now the creativity is taken away too, because this is all stolen. Well, heck, I think I'm switching to another philosopher. Never mind. I am just disappointed by, the dishonesty of it, and I mean, in a way, I shouldn't be surprised, but I mean, the reason I generally feel like, there are a lot of people who were terrible human beings who created masterworks. And, should we throw the masterworks out, and I say no, but, when it comes to, if it's not your own, then that's a different ballgame.
Well, one thing I want to acknowledge here, not that I'm not holding Heidegger accountable for ethics, but there's also the difference in cultural values.
Yeah.
Right? The Japanese may view, even though he was being tutored by Heidegger, that him using what he got from them as stealing. Heidegger might have been looking at it differently because of the difference in cultural values. That happens a lot. One example, when we were preparing to go to Africa, Mrs. Chinsman of Man's Travel kept using the term "you people." Okay? Now, in our culture, that's deplorable, right? What are you talking about? Well, come to find out, I said, well, hold on, everyone. We had like 20 people on the call. Hold on. I don't think it means what we think it means. Well, come to find out, it was a term of endearment. Like, you belong to us, you people. So I think we have to be careful with that.
And not only,
that's a good point.
Yeah, not only could it be a cultural thing, but it also could be the intellectual practice of incorporating someone's ideas to build a wider system. Because Heidegger went much further. He took the ball and ran further with it. and
Mm-hmm.
probably thought of himself as already aware of some of the ideas that he took. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that Wanda's right that there may be more going on than we realize.
Mm-hmm. And we
Well, I
didn't,
mean, I
I'm
think
sure
that's a
they
good.
didn't have the IRB back then.
That's true. And I think too, I mean, over time, right? I mean, I think Wanda, it's a really good point. I mean, I think over time, our definitions have changed of what's acceptable and what isn't. I think you're really correct in that. And, just like, in art too, I mean, that's a really good point that brings to my mind what you said brings to mind art. People didn't think much of doing that, where it's like, okay, I do a painting that's very similar. Where's the line? What we call stealing today back then might have been inspiration, and in art that was done all the time, right? It's a building. I think those are really good points. Thank you for that, Betty and
Mm,
Wanda. Thank
yeah.
you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sabine, I would like to push back on what you said about language. Actually, you weren't proclaiming anything; you were wondering about it. Language that freezes a thought or a meaning. This has been a debate in the past. Does the naming of something lock it in forever, or is that one step toward building on, and then something we'll understand better later? And I actually was a victim of this. Um, my language research group was presenting a paper at the organizational studies workshop in Corfu one year, and the organizational studies group had decided that language was not something that they wanted to take on because it was just naming things. It was freezing them, essentially. And what we tried to show them that they did not want to hear was that it was a co construction. When one person says A and the second one says B, you've got A and B getting together to decide whether C is their thing or not. So the freezing is actually getting off track, because language as a social construction is how we all move forward, how we think, how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do when you're comparing high context cultures with low context cultures, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
your what is it? Your low context cultures, they pay more attention to body language,
Mm.
right? And then your high context cultures pay more attention to the language. And you could
Well,
have disagreement there.
yeah, actually, it's the low context people who want the words to contain all the meaning. High context, they look at the extra parts of what's going on.
Right.
But
Okay.
yeah, but we've all got a little bit of low and high as far as that is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the words we're using tonight, Eduardo probably is able to take two perspectives because he's got two worlds that function in him. And so we become a little flexible when we
Right.
hear something. And I hear the flexibility in what you say, Wanda.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Mm.
Mm. Mm.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm wondering if this is a good time to switch gears a bit, because I wanted to do the presentation on the CIW with you all, and I think I can make some transitions here. But so I wanted to get into Bakhtin. Can I get permission to move into Bakhtin a bit, and then we
I
can?
have Ganesha here, and Ganesha gives you permission.
Wow, that is like more permission I've ever had my whole life. Thank you, Ganesh. So, now, I might be as guilty as some of the people I'm going to skewer that use the word polyphony and don't have a clue as to what it what it meant in Dostoevsky's poetics. So, and this is Bakhtin's book, Problems with Dostoevsky's Poetics. Now, this book, 1929, and then it was put into English like 1984, 1979. It came out in another version. This is 1984 version. So what Bakhtin was doing in his early period was critiquing critical scholars who had read through Dostoevsky's works, and Bakhtin actually says they're incorrect. You have this incorrect, sir, and you have a good point here, but you're missing the full thrust of the work by Dostoevsky. Now, I think that critique has stood the test of time, in that we're not citing these other authors that he's objecting to them, and I kind of did a brief summary of it. But let me just show you. I won't show you. Let me just talk to you about. Let me give you a title of one of the works here in the management literature about polyphony, and it is as strange as they come. Let's see. And it was in a handbook on strategic communication, and these authors, Agerholm and Thompson, talk about the role of polyphony in management team meetings. Now, that's about as drab and as useless as wrong a way of understanding polyphony. And I admit, in my own book in 2008, I think I glossed over polyphony, and now I'm going to make up for my earlier sins. So now, part of the issue is when Bakhtin centers in on what constitutes polyphony. Page 6 of the book, he says it's a plurality of independent and unmerged voices and consciousness. A genuine polyphony of fully valid voices is in fact a chief characteristic of Dostoevsky's novels. But that is not an accurate understanding of the concept of polyphony. I mean, that's the definition everybody grabs, and they go, oh, okay, as long as we're all sitting around and we're expressing our viewpoint, and you have your point of view and I have my point of view, and we're fully engaged in that, we got polyphony. Well, yeah, but in the Western mind, it's, as Sabina was talking about before, it's about the destination, the goal, the convergence, the consensus, the getting there. And what Bakhtin is very explicit about in his critiques is polyphony doesn't have a teleology like dialectic. It does not lead to a synthesis of these points of view or some sort of convergence. And in fact, the views are so extremely conflictful that it's unlikely you're going to get anything that converges out of it. And certainly not a management team meeting, better communication. You know, that is just not, that's like wrong. But if you go through the management literature, and don't do it because you're just going to get a headache, and look at polyphony, you're going to see case after case after case where it's not really Dostoevsky. Now, just to make the case of that, I'll take one of his books here, Notes from Underground, and it also has the Grand Inquisitor, but I'm not going to deal with that. So Notes from Underground, and just see if I can find it here in my glasses. And listen how it starts here. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unpleasant man. I think my liver is diseased. However, I don't know beans about my disease, and I'm not sure what is bothering me. I don't treat it and never have, though I respect medicine and doctors. Besides, I'm an extremely superstitious, let's say sufficiently so to respect medicine. No, I refuse to treat it out of spite. You probably will not understand that well, but I understand it. Of course, I can't explain it to you, just whom I am annoying. He goes on, and it turns out that this character is a bureaucrat in one governmental institution, and he gets joy out of somebody coming to him for something and then just screwing over them, just either intimidating them or making sure they don't get what they're coming there for. So it's a confession of this character, and I won't go through the whole book, but when I read that again and was connecting it to the Nelson Peltz, the executive CEO of one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, that called Trian, Trian hedge fund, that it occurred to me that every episode that involves Nelson Peltz, where I get a glimpse of his personality, is much like this underground man. This is a spiteful, mean individual who finds his joy in life by raiding corporation, getting rid of as many people as possible, cutting the cost to the bones. He's like the McKinsey consulting company incarnate. If you've ever seen John Oliver's critique of the McKinsey consulting, that these recruits to McKinsey just sit around and laugh at, another one hits the dust, another one hits the dust, or hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more. These Harvard, Stanford graduates are sitting around how to help inform corporation after corporation. And they have one of the biggest consulting firms in the world. It's the same cloth that Nelson Peltz is cut from, right? It's not about helping the corporation at all. It's about doing as much destruction as possible that will move the money in the short term. Now, the Trian Fund, and if I could just show you a diagram or two, let me see if I've got opportunity to do that. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so you're seeing here the diagram here of the Trian partners and some of their portfolio companies. Now, the ones on the right, General Electric, the Bank of New York Mellon, Cisco, Wendy's, which I'm going to talk about, Procter & Gamble, Mondelez International. These are companies that Nelson Peltz and his crew has raided, and they're now got enough directorships on their board of directors. I think in the case of Wendy's, they have about 5 to 7 people from the Trian Fund that sit on the board of directors. So they effectively run the company, and they run the investments, and they doing all kinds of things. On the left-hand side, you can see Edward Garden, you see Nelson Peltz himself, his son Matthew Peltz, his partner Peter May. These are the main directors of the Trian Fund. And if you go to the bottom here, I hope I'm not moving too fast, you'll see 4 examples of what's been coming forth in the news the last couple of years, expose, that the investors in the Trian Fund that is going out and butchering other corporations and laying off older workers and just destroying as much as possible, these investors are often public retirement funds, like the California Public Employees Retirement System. Well, that's one of the biggest ones. New York State Local Retirement System, the Wells Fargo Company. Well, they're kind of a beast anyway. Kaiser Permanente, mainly out of California, medical hospitals. So their retirement of their employees is being invested. So what's strange and weird about this is you have, let's just take the case of Wendy's. You have all these directors who have a board seat on the Wendy's board of directors. Matthew Peltz's son, Dennis Krautz, Ken Gilbert. These are all participants in the hedge fund. Peter Rothschild, out of Drexel Burnham, is an associate of Nelson Peltz, and then Peter May, one of the partners in Trian. They so much dominate Wendy's that I want to say it exhibits, characterizes what Bakhtin and Dostoevsky were getting at with polyphony. Polyphony is not a comfortable, harmonious tea ceremony. Polyphony may be the most vicious kind of communication among fully engaged voices that don't back off, you know? Now, it's not an equality system. This is not, like I read another article said, we could use polyphony for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going like, not the polyphony that Dostoevsky was talking about, not the one Bakhtin was talking about. Whatever you're doing is something strange and from another planet. So one of the things that I want to show you, let me get it up on the screen so just as a quick example, so you can see how this works. Okay. Let's see, go here, go share. Okay, this is called the House of Horror. And it was a Me Too kind of thing that happened to this multi-billionaire family. This is Peltz, his wife, and his daughter. When she was much younger, she's now just got married to, I think, a tennis superstar or something, and I don't know, $10 million wedding. But what happened, allegedly, and there's several accounts, is Mrs. Peltz summoned the butler in the big estate, $123 million estate. So there's not just one butler, there's several butlers, nannies, maids, cooks, etc., and chauffeurs. So Mrs. Peltz summoned the butler to the master bathroom, and she discovered drops of urine on the toilet seat. She demanded the butler clean it up right then and there, which he did. And then she insisted that he clean the toilet again. So 3 times she called him back to clean the same toilet. I think it was already cleaned the second and third time. This was just a ritual of shame and degradation towards the butler. And then Mr. Peltz turned around and fired the butler. Now, that all kind of blew over, but then people started coming out of the woodwork and say, hey, if you think the mother is bad, you should hear what the daughter does. Peltz's youngest daughter routinely threatens maids, and she will have her father fire them if they don't do as she asks. She's hardly bluffing. Her last nanny was reportedly hauled out of the house by two beefy bodyguards after the girl decided she didn't care much for her. So employee turnover at the estate is so high that new faces appear almost on a weekly basis. Now, I will just say that the Peltz family denies this, and they say it doesn't happen. So, and not every Me Too thing is probably valid, but if you look at the Peltz behavior, Nelson Peltz with relation to Wendy's, this is an individual that refuses to talk with workers or their representatives. He absolutely, and I think it just speaks to the aristocracy of somebody living in a $123 million mansion in Palm Beach, which is next to Donald Trump's mansion right on the beach before Trump sold it. I think he's running out of money. And then he has Peltz has another mansion in New York where he was helicoptering in from his mansion in a cushy part of New York suburb and into the financial district. And then the neighbors in their mansions said, hey, we don't want to hear your Peltz helicopter every morning taking you to work. Get a chauffeur and take a limo like everybody else. I think this guy is kind of oblivious to other people. And if you look at it, every episode, because I've been studying the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, these are the workers who are getting freed from being locked in vans, being raped in the fields, having their wages stolen, and self-organize to create worker-driven audits of major corporations like Taco Bell, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Walmart's food operation, not the whole Walmart, et cetera, and has succeeded in creating what they call the Fair Food Program. Well, Nelson Peltz and his colleagues won't listen to anything like that. Rather than participate in fair food and ethical practices toward workers and auditing the local situations so people aren't raped, abused, and tortured in the fields. And I'm not exaggerating if you look into the history and situation here. And then to not even talk to them is just so typical of the Peltz family and how they treat their own servants, Why should you talk to the butler? Why should we talk to the maid? I don't like my nanny. Fire her. You can start to understand that the workers would be the last person Peltz cares about in the world, because he wants to recruit those pension funds, multi-billion-dollar pension funds. He wants to raid like Disney. And the whole thing blew up in his face when in the last few months, he tried to muscle in on Disney and demanded a seat on the board and demanded that they fire the CEO, Igor, somebody or other, whatever his name was, and bounce down a bunch of executives and then come in and cost cut Disney Corporation at every level and lay off as many people as they can so they could double the share payments, dividends, quarter by quarter. And but Disney turned around after about less than a year and said, you know what? Let's look at your organization. How effective is Peltz at running this organization that has all these super corporations involved? They had Family Dollar for a while. They had another one, and what they did in the financial analysis was very revealing. It turns out that when Peltz, then in 50% of the corporations that he rated during his tenure on their boards of directors, those companies did worse than the Standards & Poor's index as an index than before or after Peltz left. In other words, the guy doesn't deliver on rating and turning around companies. The turnaround artist is a turnaround bullshit artist, allegedly, And so it's much like the con man in Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. And I wish Duncan was here because we do a lot of work on that area. It's much like the emperor behind the curtain rattling, creating thunder, roaring, and he's not doing anything but yelling and screaming and creating thunder claps. And that's his whole thing. If you look at now, he's trying to hold it together, and investor companies are now learning that their retirement funds for workers are being used to abuse workers in other corporations. And that's just causing people to jump ship from Triand hedge fund and leave the hedge fund. So the lost several $1 billion, still has a big chunk there. And how he's got to create the con, and he's going after Allstate Insurance. And he said to Allstate, well, I want to be on your board. I want to remove management positions. I want to cut costs in your organization, and I will double the dividends to shareholders. And this is what he's doing to hold on to Wendy's right now. The backdrop on the Wendy's story, he took about 2008, he forms Triand, and he gets a seat on, might have been 2005, right around there, gets a seat on the board of Wendy's, gets his cronies on the board of Wendy's. And does Wendy's do any better? No. What's happening behind the scenes, and we're finding this out in the financial analysis, is called insider trading. As the Triand people are buying stocks, then selling stocks, buying stocks again to make the dividend rise. This causes more people to buy the Wendy's stock, then immediately sell the stock. And I'll show you a chart in a second, just how extensive this has been over the last 15 years.
Now, isn't that illegal, David? That's what
not when you're a multi-billionaire. No, somehow he gets away with it.
Yeah, Martha Stewart didn't. They sent her to prison.
I understand, but no, nobody's touched him with a glove. Wow. And what he does, though, he'll exaggerate. Well, Wendy's is doing so much better in the marketplace now. It's a good time to invest. We're going to pay huge dividends. And then his lawyers will write to the SEC, well, we kind of misspoke and we exaggerate a little bit of our claims, but your average investor is not reading the SEC reports. They're only getting the emperor's rattling the cage there. So he does that. Then finally, there's an initiative put forward by a group of nuns to have transparency with the Wendy's behavior in the tomato fields, lettuce fields, onions, etc., that they use in their burgers. And people want to know, well, is there rape going on? Is there wage theft? And what they do, they move the production from Florida of tomatoes to Mexico. And then there's a big expose that things are worse there, and they're having more rape, more abuse, more physical beatings, etc., and people enslaved. So then they move it, more recent last 3 years, they move it to Canada in greenhouses, undisclosed location, greenhouses, workers, and this is supposed to be better working conditions. And so people have had enough, and Wendy's shareholders were trying to get a resolution to get into the Fair Food Program for the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, called CIW, and another resolution to remove Peltz and all his Triand cronies from about 5 to 7 directorships, get them off the board of directors of Wendy's. This initiative passed, as I understand it, and what happened? Peltz said, you know what, screw all this. We're going to take this public company private. And we have a buyer in the wings, and they're going to buy Wendy's, all its shares. And we're taking it off the stock exchange, NASDAQ or whatever it is. And so for the next 2 years, it was all this, well, who's going to buy it? Is Trian going to buy it? Is some other company going to buy Wendy's? Going to take the company private? Well, a few months ago, he said, you know what? We've decided at Trian that Triam, whatever it's called, the hedge fund, we're not going to buy Wendy's, and there's nobody else who's going to buy Wendy's either. And then if you look what happened before, during, and after that, a whole lot of insider trading are going on by all the Trian executives, selling off about 10 million shares, if I have the number right. So let me get that accurate to you so that you won't think I'm bullshitting you, because I could be. Okay, here we go.
I don't think that any of us here would consider that even.
Well, I don't want to.
We know you better than that.
Okay, so look at the action here, November 14th to March 2023. So this is right when this announcement, we're not selling, it's all through the financial publications. So Peltz, 30 price per share, 18, sells 1.88 million. Then Peter May, his partner, sells exactly the same, 1.88 million. Then Nelson Peltz, another 1.8. Then his son, Matthew, 2.91 million, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're selling in the thousands. And then towards the end, Matthew and Ed Garden, who I showed you before, I think he was with a Goldman Sachs guy, 3.63 million. So I don't know why they're not prosecuting this company, this hedge fund. I think they're just confused. They can't follow the trades. I don't know. I really don't know. That's my presentation. So my statement is, Nelson Peltz, you're the underground man. I'm going to be quiet now.
Has their insider trading impacted stock investors? Because typically, and I just went through this, you have to give her permission for decisions that are made that impact your stock.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get my head around this.
Well, that's the smaller problem. The bigger problem is the whole system of capitalism that puts the needs of workers into the toilet. And while everybody's playing with stock prices and these kind of situations, the whole system.
And I know they're subject to annual audits. They're supposed to be subject to annual audit. So who is auditing them?
They're auditing themselves, or they have some consulting firms. At one point, they hired a nun to audit the tomato fields, and the nun was well-meaning, but couldn't contain all the scandals that were erupting in the fields. The interesting point is, there's a solution to the worker abuse. It's called the Fair Food Program, where if corporations have growers that are abusing workers, they're taken offline until they get their act together. And believe me, they are motivated to treat workers a whole lot better. It's not a perfect situation. Workers are still low paid. Workers still work harder than all of us work together, in the fields, in the sun. And these are people we've interviewed, and the treatment was just atrocious. You would think it was 3 centuries ago in slavery, where I remember one lady saying she was told by the foreman when she asked for a drink of water in the 100-degree sun in Florida, he said, hey, there's a puddle on the side of the road, drink that and get back to work,
That sounds like a Nelson Mandela situation. with the
I
guard.
mean,
He asked for water and he urinated on him.
yeah,
Oh,
you have these, it's documented incident after incident after incident, and you have solutions, but yet we allow somebody to have $200 million mansions and millions of dollars in weddings and amass billions of dollars, 1.7 billion, I think, to be accurate. And why? Why support an aristocratic, opulent king's lifestyle and abuse hundreds of thousands of workers, if not millions? Anyway, that's my story. I got a little bit excited. I'm sorry.
David, I was inspired by it. I had never thought about this, that we actually have at the level of the workers and their needs and their struggles. That's a kind of dialogue that with polyphony works. You have answerability and addressivity. Bakhtin's ideas work. But unfortunately, at a higher level, all over the United States, money is what talks louder. In other words, you can grapple with working conditions all you want, but
Well,
if someone's wealth is what speaks louder, that's going to.
I think it's worse than that. I think we got to take it a step further and look at Ronnie Saylor's volume on the Encyclopedia of Business Storytelling, that they're misusing the numbers, and the numbers don't bear out and support their strategies. And that's what I'm noticing with Nelson Peltz. That was my primary thing in the example, is his strategy for revitalizing these corporations and what he was going to do to Disney and what he's proposing to do to Allstate actually makes these companies worse off, right? It's not the it's the myth of the turnaround and the reputation of Peltz to go into these corporations and turn them around and be like the McKinsey consultant that knows more. If you remember the John Oliver documentary, he says, I don't know, it's a comedy show actually. He says he's interviewing the people from McKinsey, and they said, well, do you listen to your client? He said, absolutely not. We don't listen to our client. Our clients don't know shit. We are the experts. At McKinsey, we go in and we tell them what to do. We don't ask questions. We don't listen to answers. You know what I'm saying?
I saw that. That was good. It was
So
very
this
good.
is the same thing with Peltz. He's not listening. He's saying what you're saying, Betty, that he's going to make more money for everybody, but in fact, the corporation is dissolving, and I hope he gets liquidated. I hope that this is the result for Peltz, that this whole rating firm he's got gets liquidated and absorbed back into capitalism.
Well,
David, I have a question about that at this point, though. Was Disney the only company that actually looked at the numbers? Because I would think after a certain point, you would get a reputation, it seems natural, let's say you have an investment, that you check your statements and, that you know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand.
Well, actually, the word is no.
As it does,
Nobody did it before Disney. And Disney said, well, let's look at your organization, how it's run, and what your record is.
Right.
And then
that be a normal thing to
doing it.
do? Wouldn't you kind of check that before you get into any sort of
No, for 15 years,
I'm
nobody
just
checked.
baffled by that. You wouldn't buy a home without a home inspection.
Back to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Nobody checked out the wizard until the very end when Toto tore down the curtain,
But why?
Well, it sounds like they're profiting off of stockholder ignorance, and they're plagued by groupthink, because based on
they're intimidated
that I've had, if you have conflict on a board, that's a good thing. The other board members aren't saying, excuse my language, shit. That is the problem.
because they'll be removed. And
they're not speaking up. Somebody's got to speak up. If you don't have, you have a voice. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, they're not speaking up. Even now, you go to Wendy's. You go to Wendy's in Las Cruces, New Mexico. These managers of a Wendy's don't know what's going on. The workers behind the counter, the fry cook, they don't know what's going on. You know,
and that's who I train. Operational managers. I'm going to make sure that they know they need to have a voice, especially if money is coming out of their salaries, investing in their company's stock. Pay attention.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Mm. Mm.
We all love heteroglossia here. We worship heteroglossia, but I think Bakhtin's interpretation of it as a student of Dostoevsky's poetics is perhaps a little different. That we're not giving it the critical edge that he gave it, and the heteroglossia, we're like in the Book of T, we're lost in the chaos of life, and some forces are converging and some forces are diverging in this simultaneous acts of language. I don't know why he pegged it all language, but whatever. Yeah, so we're in these forces, but that doesn't mean that they're harmonious forces, that they somehow lead to some sort of Pollyanna situation. Anyway, I'm a critical theorist by nature, so, except for that one moment when Eduardo caught me and disenchanted me, or enchanted me. I don't know what it was. Enchanted me and my grandmother. Yeah, so it's just, I love this Notes from the Underground, though, the way the character's personality takes over, because it defies a lot of narratology, as in Bakhtin's analysis of it, that, Bakhtin says, it's not about the plot. Get over that. It's not about the plot. And what about the character? It's not about the characters. What about the theme? It's not about the theme. It's that these personalities take over. The shaming, the deprivation, the self consciousness of this titan Nelson Peltz, this is not a happy character. This is not somebody on an adventure for discovery. This is a destroyer, destroying himself, his family. It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get into more gossip about it, but whatever.
Wow.
I got on a rant. I'm sorry.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, just take a feminist stance on this. There are some of these big pension things. I think it's the New York pensions. There's, I think, 3 or 4. They're called feminist investors, and they do not want their pension funds to have anything to do with sexual harassment, with rape, with wage theft, discriminatory behaviors, all of that. And they are organizing to pull out the pension funds from these hedge funds, to pull them out, And what they have to do is overcome the whole discourse that these grand mind hedge fund executives have more knowledge than the corporations themselves and how to run things. And so I don't know, just if I had my career to start up all over again, I'd have people read notes from the underground and say, isn't this what executives are caught up in? Not all of them. I mean, there's some beautiful, wonderful executives out there. There's some wonderful consulting. But if you look at like the consulting industry, the top 6 to 8 players, Deloitte, Booz Allen, a number of them, McKinsey, et cetera, they use the same methodology: cost cut, layoff, bump up the dividends in the quarter, big parachutes, big executive bonuses. And even though we know, Ronnie, that this is just not very effective form of economics, they keep doing it and doing it. And then we all participate with these small consulting companies. You go to Academy of Management and you have the consulting org development division and the consultation division. And you have Henri Saval, for example, doing good work, doing good democratic work in organizations. But they are such a small part of the whole industry. Let's say it's $100 billion in the Saval, and the good people, they are doing less than $1 billion. So it's, and don't quote me on the numbers. Actually, I did an article about it. You can quote me. I actually researched the numbers. Yeah, or a chapter.
I was stunned, David, by your graphic there that you had, all the connections.
Oh, can I show you something about that? I wanted to show it to all of you.
I was just like, oh my goodness.
Here is, it's called Little Sis. It's called Little Sis. Let me show you this. Because it's a tremendous resource, and I find it very valuable if you're doing these kinds of studies. Okay, so let me share this screen with you. Now you see here, I asked for things about Trian, and Little Sis does these maps. So for example, you push here and you get a map of another kind of map of Wendy's Trian, the investors, their positions, the major investor dollar amounts from the California teachers. In fact, this is a good diagram. I should put this in the chapter. I like this one. You know, so you get kind of a map of what's going on, and you can enter any topic in your search engine. You know, I could do the same thing for Disney. And here's the domination of the board. This is one diagram I put in the study. I'm not sure what this, I don't take money from Wall Street, but this shows the relation of Peltz to Trump and other, Charles Schwab, the Blackstone Group, which is in the news a lot recently. So each one of these Triumph and Wendy's, that's sort of it. And more about the pension funds. So this alternative displays, but it's kind of interesting, or you can go down and look at Peter May's board ties. He's one of the partners in Trian. Anyway, so if you use this system, you can go, for example, Disney, and then you'll get the old Disney. Well, they're not showing me any diagram here. I wanted to see a diagram. I want to see a diagram. Roy Disney. Well, this is just lists. Oh, here's maps. Counting for the fat cronyism at GWU. I don't know what. Private equity billionaire fills Trump's jobs cabinets. So you get these maps. Other people do them. I don't have to do anything, but just translate them. Anyway, I thought you might enjoy that. And that's at littlesis.org.
And who's GWUFA? Are these experts?
George Washington University.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
University of Miami. And this one,
Got it.
it's a different topic. So.
Okay.
So who is actually putting these maps together?
There are a group of finance, accounting specialists, people in map graphics, and they do that. Little Sis.
I've never seen that before.
Me neither. I just discovered it because I found one of them in an article I liked, and then I traced it back to get a permission. And then I found out I have to go to Little Sis. And I just contacted them today to get permissions for two of their maps. But these guys.
I mean, when you see it visually like that, it's rather overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, you look at this like, whoa.
Is this comparable to like a research gate?
Yeah, I guess. I suppose.
But more finance.
Little Sis. So about Little Sis.
Yeah.
Little Sis is a free database detailing connections between powerful people and organizations. We bring transparency to influence of social networks. Who are the wealthiest Americans? Where did White House officials work before they were appointed? Which lobbyists are married to politicians, et cetera, et cetera. And
interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing this, David.
Oh, you're welcome. I've been having fun with Little Sis.
I have a question. When you were starting talking about the notes from the underground, you mentioned the dates, and I thought one of them of the translation of Bakhtin, or were you referring?
Bakhtin, 1929, his book on the problems of Dostoevsky's poetics. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was translated to English because I was under the impression that it wasn't until 1968 that Julia Kristeva translated it for the first time from the Russian to any other language.
Yeah, I think, there's a whole history of the document itself, and with the wars happening, not getting published, but also he intimidated the faculty at the Russian university, so
Yeah.
he had trouble getting a dissertation committee together.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of history in that, and I didn't go into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that it wasn't until 1968 when it was translated. And
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right.
when you and Ronnie were talking about the heteroglossia and polyphony, I was also thinking that there's a line by Voloshinov that fits perfectly with both concepts, and it's at the beginning of the Marxist philosophy of language of Voloshinov, that for many years, many historians thought that Voloshinov was Bakhtin writing under another name.
Yeah.
But the opening lines of Voloshinov is the class does not correspond to the sign community. So, implying that there's also a polyphony inside capital, and there's also polyphony under the proletariat, and that sometimes proletarians are going to have a capitalistic voice, and vice versa. So just something that it's actually really, really complex. The voices and
Yeah, that's the takeaway from this whole presentation I'm giving. The polyphony is very complex. It's as complex as heteroglossia or more, and it's closer to hegemony than it is to consensus building. You know, that's what I'm getting out of it, and I wish I would have known it earlier in my career. I'll tell you that. But who's got time in academia to sit down and read notes from the underground? A classic Russian novel. But yeah, it's not that long either. Yeah, so it's been a wonderful day. Yeah. We've had a good time. We should probably let Betty go to bed. And,
yeah, it's almost 11 here. Yeah.
Go for it. Do whatever you want, Ronnie. You.
Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful, Ronnie. How's this streaming work? We're being streamed out there. Are you captured?
Live.
And we got 3 viewers or 10 viewers? Negative 1 viewer. We're just.
Ronnie, are you still in Washington State, Seattle? Okay.
So how is Jillian? I haven't seen her in a while. How's Jillian doing?
Ah,
Oh,
yeah.
I see. Oh my gosh. All the best to you and Jillian.